The final issue that we're going to be addressing today is the issue of taxation. And as firefighters, we address this issue in two distinct ways. One, as people who are dependent upon public revenue for our very livelihoods, for our equipment, and for our staffing, we have very much a vested interest in overall tax policy, because without adequate revenue, obviously, local government is unable to afford to meet our needs, both in terms of staffing, salary, etc. But also, as Americans, we have a vested interest for our families in a fair and equitable tax policy, one that was just so eloquently referenced by Senator Sarbanes. And we're very pleased today to have with us a true expert on progressive taxation. For the last 2 decades, Bob McIntyre has been someone that has really been at the forefront of this issue. Whenever you watch the talking heads on television on Sunday morning or any of the shows, or the pundits quoting people in terms of America's tax policy, how we can improve it, how we can ensure that it's equitable, they're simply quoting Bob McIntyre. And Bob has been a friend of the International, a friend of the organized labor movement for a number of years, and we're delighted to have him today. Please welcome Bob McIntyre from Progressive Tax Institute. Bob.
Hi. Senator Sarbanes gave my speech. It's really great to be here with the firefighters today. I feel safer, especially compared to my old offices. We just moved, but the other place was a fire trap. We were talking out there in the green room that perhaps we should have had you over once a week just to keep us safe. Well, I was asked to talk about big picture tax reform because, as you know, the President had an advisory panel last year that reported on that exact topic. Of course, that panel's report seems to be dead on arrival. Even the President doesn't seem to be for it at this point. But in the interest of beating a dead horse, I thought I'd talk to you a little bit about what they proposed and then talk about what's actually going to be going on in tax legislation this year. So if you could all turn to page A78 of your 1040 instructions, we can get going. The tax advisory panel that the President appointed, it was an interesting group of people in the sense no one had ever heard of anybody on the panel. They were, you might say, amateurs. And they had some interesting views. As you may have heard, the government is running very large budget deficits these days. Gargantuan, you might call them. In fact, we're funding about a quarter of all non-Social Security spending with borrowing every year these days under the current administration. So the Tax Advisory Panel's first step in their organizing meeting was to say that they wanted to add $7 trillion more in addition to the budget deficit over the next 2 decades. Now, they explained that this is what they meant by revenue neutral. Honest to God. Now, another thing that's been going on, and some people like me at least have criticized it, is there's been a big shift in who pays the taxes over the last several years under President Bush. Away from big corporations, away from wealthy investors, and onto the wage earners. The panel saw this problem, looked hard at it, and proposed to shift the tax burden even further away from investors and onto wage earners. I thought that was a poor idea, too. But, you know, we're all willing to pay a great deal more in taxes and get a lot less in government as long as the tax laws would be somewhat simpler. At least that's what the panel told us. But their plan isn't that simple, although they say it is. In fact, they say that their tax form will be called the 1040 Simple. And what could be simpler than a tax form called Simple? They say they've got everything down to 1 page instead of 2 like we have now. In fact, they say we could put the tax form on a big postcard if the type is small enough. But don't start getting excited even about that part, because it's a hoax. As anybody who's filled out their tax return ever or lately, since we're getting into tax time, knows that at the top of the tax form now there's a section, kind of big because it's in large type, where you tell the IRS whether you're married or you're single or you're a single parent, and you list your dependents and you put their social security numbers. Not a hard part of the form. Well, that part they took out because it wouldn't fit on their one page, and they moved it to a separate form. Well, that's getting simpler already. Then, you know that when you read the form, at least the long one, they make you list your different kinds of income. You know, your wages, or your dividends, or your business income, or your rents, and so forth. Sort of an aid to the IRS to figure out if you're reporting it properly. Well, they took that out too. They moved that to another form. The details are somewhere else. That's in page 3. But that doesn't count. We're only on the one-page form. And then all those adjustments that you take. There's a big section of those. You know, you got to deduct your teacher expenses or your contributions to your IRA or whatever. They're all in a separate form. If this works, then I think they lacked ambition. Why not just one line? Write down your tax. See schedules A, B, C, D, E, F, and G to calculate. A one-line form. It would be perfect. Well, they also say they're going to make things simpler when it comes to itemized deductions. You know, those really complicated things where we have to take the statement from the bank and find on there, on line 3, what we paid in mortgage interest. They also tell us our property taxes half the time. It's all on the same one, but it's really hard to do. Well, they would get rid of those things like deductions for people who have really, really big medical expenses and, you know, are really on hard times. They get rid of that. They get rid of union dues. They get rid of casualty losses. It's sort of a bad move given the hurricanes, but people in Louisiana might not be too crazy about that one. And they get rid of all the deductions for state and local taxes. Although I can't think of a deduction that is easier to put on your form than writing down that, because, you know, they tell you. It's on your wage statements when you get your W-2.